The cold wind brushed across the empty street as the girl sat on the curb, hugging her thin coat tightly around her shoulders. She was small and quiet, her hair tangled and her shoes worn from walking miles each day. The city around her moved fast. People hurried past, cars rushed by, lights flickered in store windows, but she stayed still, watching and listening. Somewhere nearby, faint music came from a small theater. Her eyes followed the sound until she saw the poster on the wall. Young Musicians Competition tonight. She didn't know why, but her heart began to beat faster. She loved the piano. She had loved it since she was very young, back when her mother worked as a cleaner in a music school. Sometimes, late at night when no one was around, she would sneak into the empty hall and touch the keys. Her small fingers barely reached an octave, but the sound that came out filled her chest with warmth. Her mother always smiled and said one day she would play for real people. That dream had never left her, even when everything else did. Now sitting on the street, she looked through the glass doors of the theater. Inside, bright lights and well-dressed families filled the room. Young boys and girls carried music sheets and smiled for pictures. They had teachers, parents, and encouragement. She had only her memories and the faint hope that somehow she could be part of that world again. She didn't have a ticket, but she waited outside, listening to the muffled sound of applause and piano music from within. After a while, the door opened and a janitor stepped out, holding a mop. He noticed her and frowned. "You shouldn't be here," he said, not unkindly, but with the tone of someone used to moving people along. She lowered her eyes and murmured that she only wanted to listen. He hesitated, then sighed. "All right, but stay near the back. Don't cause trouble." She nodded and slipped inside quietly. The theater was warm, and the air smelled of perfume and polished wood. The stage lights shone brightly, making everything seem magical. She stood at the back, her eyes wide as she watched a young boy in a suit play a piece she recognized, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. He played well, but his fingers seemed mechanical, precise but without feeling. The judges nodded politely. The audience clapped. When he finished, another girl went up next, her dress glittering like stars. She smiled proudly at the crowd before playing a fast, showy piece that made everyone cheer. The street girl felt small and invisible. Still, she couldn't stop watching. Every note that echoed through the hall seemed to pull her deeper into her memories, of her mother humming softly, of the piano keys that once carried her dreams. The competition went on until a short break was announced. People stood and chatted, and the judges stepped down for coffee. The girl stayed where she was, staring at the piano on stage. It looked almost holy under the soft lights. Smooth, black, perfect. She took a deep breath and whispered to herself that she would touch it just once, just to feel what it was like again. When no one was looking, she walked down the aisle, her steps quiet and unsure. Her hands trembled as she reached the stage. She climbed the small stairs, heart pounding so loudly she could hear it in her ears. She sat at the bench, her body barely fitting behind the grand instrument. The smooth wood beneath her fingers felt familiar and comforting. She pressed one key softly. The note rang pure and warm. She pressed another, then another. Her eyes closed and suddenly she forgot where she was. Her fingers began to move, slowly at first like a whisper, then faster as her confidence grew. She didn't have music sheets, but she didn't need them. She played what she remembered, what she felt. The melody rose and fell like a story, sad and beautiful, full of pain and hope. It filled the empty hall, wrapping around the chairs, the curtains, and the walls. People began to turn. A few who had stayed inside stopped talking and looked toward the stage. The janitor froze, holding his mop midair. A few seconds later, one of the judges came back early and stood in the doorway, confused at first, then slowly mesmerized. The girl's hands danced over the keys, her face calm and full of emotion. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She was playing for herself, for the little girl she used to be, and for the mother she had lost. More people came in, drawn by the music. The soft murmur of conversation stopped completely. The audience stood silent as the street girl's song filled every corner of the hall. Her fingers moved with a natural grace that no teacher could ever teach. It was as if the piano itself had been waiting for her. When she reached the final notes, her hands hovered for a moment above the keys. Then she let them fall softly, ending with a delicate whisper of sound. The hall stayed silent for a long breath. Then slowly applause began, quiet at first, then louder, rising like a wave until the entire room was clapping. Some people even had tears in their eyes. The judges, still at the door, stood speechless. The girl looked around in confusion, realizing what had happened. Her face flushed. She stood up quickly, ready to run. But before she could move, one of the judges called out, "Wait!" His voice was gentle, not angry. "Who taught you to play like that?" he asked. She lowered her head. "No one," she said softly. "I used to listen when my mother worked at a music school. I remembered the sounds." The judge walked closer, his expression kind. "That piece you played, it wasn't written anywhere, was it?" She shook her head. "No, I just played what I felt." The audience watched in silence. The man nodded slowly, clearly moved. "You have a gift," he said. "A rare one." The girl didn't know what to say. She had no home, no teacher, no family left to tell her she did well. She just smiled shyly, tears forming in her eyes. Another judge joined, and one of them handed her a small towel to wipe her face. Someone in the crowd whispered that they should let her compete properly. The idea spread quickly. Soon the whole audience was cheering again, asking for her to stay and play officially. The host, who had returned by then, looked surprised but finally smiled. "It seems," he said into the microphone, "we have one more contestant tonight." The crowd laughed and clapped again. The girl sat back down, still trembling, but now the fear was gone. She took a deep breath and began to play once more. This time, she poured everything she had into the piano: the loneliness, the hunger, the cold nights, the memories of her mother's face, the small joys she still carried. Every note spoke of her life. Every chord painted her pain and her courage. The audience didn't just listen, they felt it. The music told them things no words could. By the end, people were openly crying. The judges stood, clapping slowly, deeply moved. When she finished, she looked around the hall. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, heard, and understood. The same people who had laughed when they first saw her walk to the stage now had tears streaming down their faces. One of the judges whispered to another, "This is what music is supposed to be." As she left the stage, the janitor smiled and whispered, "I told you not to cause trouble, but that was the best kind of trouble I've ever seen." She laughed softly, wiping her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt hope flicker inside her. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing: she would never stop playing again. Outside the theater, the night air was still cold, but it didn't feel so harsh anymore. She looked up at the stars, her heart full. Somewhere she believed her mother was listening too. The next morning, the street girl woke up on a wooden bench near the park. The air was cool and a faint smell of wet grass filled the place. She blinked a few times, still half lost in the memory of the night before. For the first time in months, she had slept with a small smile on her face. She remembered the sound of applause, the shining lights, and how people had cried when she played. It almost felt like a dream, but the warmth in her heart told her it was real. She sat up and looked around. The city was already waking up. Buses rumbled by and people hurried to work, some with coffee cups in their hands, others talking on their phones. No one noticed her, but she didn't mind. She felt different now, as if something had changed inside her. For a moment, she closed her eyes and imagined playing the piano again. The memory of the smooth keys under her fingers brought tears to her eyes. Her stomach growled, reminding her she hadn't eaten since the morning before. She reached into her pocket and found only a few coins. She stood up and began walking toward a small bakery at the corner of the street. The smell of fresh bread drifted out the door. She watched people buy breakfast, and when it was quiet, she went in and asked softly if she could get something small. The man behind the counter looked at her for a long moment, then handed her a warm roll and said, "Take it. You look like you need it." She smiled shyly and whispered thank you. As she ate outside, she noticed a tall woman coming toward her. The woman wore a long coat and carried a brown leather bag. She looked kind but serious. "You were the girl who played last night, weren't you?" she asked gently. The girl froze, not sure what to say. "I was there," the woman continued. "I'm one of the judges from the competition." The girl's eyes widened. She didn't expect anyone from that world to come looking for her. "You played beautifully," the woman said. "We talked about you after the show. None of us could forget it. We'd like you to come back to the music school today." The girl didn't know what to say. "I don't belong there," she whispered. The woman shook her head. "You do," she said softly. "You have something special. You don't need fancy clothes or lessons to prove it." For a long moment, the girl looked down at her hands. They were small and rough from sleeping outdoors. Then she looked up and nodded. "All right," she said quietly. The woman smiled and led her through the busy streets. The music school was a tall old building with wide stairs and big glass windows. As they walked inside, the girl's heart pounded. The sound of pianos and violins echoed down the halls. Students moved back and forth, laughing and talking, carrying sheet music. She tried to hide her nervousness, clutching her small bag tightly. The woman introduced her to the head of the school, an older man with white hair and a gentle face. He looked at her kindly and said, "We saw something in you last night. Not just skill, but heart. Would you like to learn properly?" The girl hesitated, unsure if it was real. "But I can't pay," she whispered. The man smiled. "No one is asking you to. You've already shown us what money can't buy." He led her to a small piano room with sunlight streaming through the window. "Play something," he said. She sat down, nervous again, and touched the keys. For a moment she thought of her mother and the nights they spent in the music hall when no one was there. Then she began to play. It was a soft, gentle tune, simple but full of emotion. The man closed his eyes as he listened. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "Yes," he said quietly. "You belong here." He told one of the teachers to help her. The teacher showed her how to sit properly, how to relax her hands, and how to read the notes on paper. She tried hard, though she had never read music before. Sometimes she got frustrated, biting her lip and whispering the sounds to herself. But each time she tried again. The teacher noticed her effort and said, "You learn faster than most. It's like the music is already inside you." Days passed, then weeks. The girl came to the school every morning. She cleaned the practice rooms in exchange for food and a place to sleep in a small attic above the hall. At night, when everyone else had gone home, she would sneak into the main hall and play. The empty space made her notes echo beautifully, and she often lost herself in the music. Sometimes the woman who had found her would listen quietly from the doorway, not wanting to disturb her. One evening, the head of the school called her into his office. "There's another competition next month," he said. "It's much bigger. Students from other cities will come. I think you should play." The girl's eyes widened. "Me," she said softly. "But I'm not ready." He smiled. "You are. You've already touched people's hearts once. Do it again." The thought of performing again scared her. She remembered the laughter from the first night, the way people had looked at her before she played. But she also remembered how it felt when the music took over, when the world disappeared and only the piano mattered. After a long silence, she nodded. "I'll try." From that day, she practiced harder than ever. She woke up before sunrise, played until her fingers hurt, and kept going even when she was tired. She learned to read music, but she still preferred to play by feeling. Her teacher understood and let her mix both styles. Sometimes the teacher smiled and said, "You remind me why music is beautiful." Other students began to notice her too. At first they whispered and wondered who she was. Some thought she didn't belong there, but when they heard her play, their words faded. One afternoon, a student came up and said, "You play like you've lived 100 lives." The girl smiled shyly but said nothing. She didn't know how to explain that in her short life, she had felt more pain and hope than most people did in years. As the competition day drew closer, the pressure grew. She wanted to make the school proud, but more than that, she wanted to play for her mother. Every night she looked at the stars through the small attic window and whispered, "I'll make you proud." Sometimes she imagined her mother's voice saying, "You already have." Finally, the day arrived. The school was filled with people from all over. The main hall shone brighter than ever, and a huge piano stood in the center of the stage. Students walked around nervously, checking their sheets and tuning their instruments. The girl sat quietly in the corner, hands folded on her lap. Her heart was racing. When her name was called, she walked slowly to the stage. This time no one laughed. Everyone was curious to see her again, the street girl who had made the judges weep. The lights felt warm on her face. She took a deep breath, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment she froze. The hall was so quiet that she could hear her own heartbeat. Then she remembered her mother's gentle smile, the nights she used to whisper, "Just play what's inside you." So she did. The first notes came softly, like raindrops on a window. Then the melody grew stronger, fuller, telling a story of struggle and hope, of loss and love. She poured her heart into every note. The audience sat completely still. Some closed their eyes, some held their breath. As she reached the end, her hands trembled, but the sound was pure and full of emotion. When the final note faded, there was silence again, then thunderous applause. People stood, clapping and cheering. Some wiped their eyes. She looked up, her face glowing with tears. The judges smiled at her with pride. One of them said softly, "You didn't just play music, you gave us your soul." That night, the girl walked home under the stars, her heart light and full. She didn't know where life would take her next, but she knew one thing for sure. The world had finally heard her voice, and after that night, everything in her life began to change slowly. The applause still echoed in her mind whenever she closed her eyes, and it filled her with both pride and fear. Pride because she had done something that once seemed impossible, and fear because she didn't know if she could ever play like that again. Every day when she woke up in the small attic above the music school, she felt a strange mix of joy and worry. She wanted to hold on to that beautiful moment forever, but life was never simple for her. The next few weeks were busy at the school. More students came to practice, and the teachers were preparing for a special concert that would be held in the city theater. It was a big event, and the school director had decided to let her perform there too. When he told her the news, her eyes went wide. She could hardly believe it. A concert in front of hundreds of people? She wanted to say yes right away, but deep inside she was scared. She spent every evening practicing in the small room with the old piano. The sound of her music drifted through the hallway, and sometimes other students would stop to listen. Some of them had started talking to her now, asking how she learned to play so well without a teacher. She always smiled and said softly, "I just listened." They didn't understand how a girl from the street could play better than students who had been studying for years. But she didn't think about that. She only thought about her mother's voice and the promise she had made to make her proud. One afternoon, while she was practicing, the judge who had first discovered her came into the room. The woman watched quietly for a while, then said, "You're improving so fast. But I can see something in your eyes you're holding back." The girl stopped playing and looked down. "I'm scared," she said honestly. "What if I fail this time?" The woman smiled gently. "Music is not about never failing," she said. "It's about being brave enough to keep playing even when you're afraid." Her words stayed with the girl long after she left. That night she couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling, repeating those words in her head. Maybe bravery was not about being fearless, but about playing even when your hands were shaking. A few days later, the city theater opened its doors for the big concert. The hall was huge, with shining chandeliers, red velvet seats, and golden curtains that sparkled under the lights. The girl had never seen anything so grand in her life. When she stepped onto the stage for the rehearsal, her legs felt weak. She walked slowly to the piano and sat down, her hands resting on her lap. The hall was empty except for a few workers fixing lights and adjusting microphones. She pressed a few keys softly, listening to how the sound echoed. It was different from the small room she practiced in, deeper and fuller. She began to play her piece, something simple but full of emotion. The music floated through the theater, soft and warm, wrapping around every corner. One of the stage workers stopped sweeping and listened quietly. When she finished, he clapped softly and said, "That sounded like sunlight." The girl smiled shyly, not sure what to say. The night of the concert arrived quickly. The backstage area was full of nervous energy. Students were tuning their instruments, teachers were giving last-minute advice, and the director moved around making sure everything was perfect. The girl stood in one corner, dressed in a simple white dress that someone from the school had given her. It wasn't fancy, but it made her feel special. Her hair was tied neatly, and her hands were trembling slightly. When her turn came, the announcer said her name with warmth in his voice. As she walked onto the stage, she could feel hundreds of eyes on her. The lights blinded her for a moment, and she could barely see the audience, but she could sense them waiting. She took a deep breath and sat at the piano. Her heart was racing, but then she remembered the woman's words. "Keep playing even when you're afraid." The first few notes came out soft and uncertain, but soon her fingers found their rhythm. She began to lose herself in the music. The melody told her story. The long nights on the streets, the pain of losing her mother, the fear of being forgotten, and the miracle of being found. Every sound carried a piece of her heart. The audience sat completely still, watching her play as if time itself had stopped. When she finished, the silence lasted for a few seconds before the applause began. It started small, then grew louder until the whole hall was clapping. She looked up and saw faces shining with emotion. Some were smiling, others were wiping tears. The sound of their clapping washed over her like a warm wave. She stood and bowed, her heart beating fast. After the concert, people came backstage to congratulate her. A few reporters asked questions, and one photographer took her picture for the newspaper. She had never seen so many kind faces around her. But there was one man who stood out. He was older, wearing a dark coat and hat, and he watched her from a distance with quiet eyes. When she noticed him, he smiled softly and walked over. "You remind me of someone I used to know," he said. His voice was deep and calm. "I own a small recording studio nearby. Would you like to visit sometime? I think the world should hear your music." She didn't know what to say. The idea of recording music sounded like something from another world. But the man's tone was gentle, not pushy. She nodded shyly. "Maybe," she said. He handed her a small card with his name and address. "When you're ready," he said, and then walked away. That night, back in her attic room, she held the card in her hand and stared at it for a long time. She wondered if this was another chance life was offering her. She felt grateful but also confused. So many things were happening so fast. Just months ago, she had been sleeping on the street, unsure if she would even find food the next day. Now people wanted to hear her play in theaters and studios. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew she didn't want to stop now. Over the next week, she kept practicing, but something inside her began to feel heavy. The applause and compliments were nice, but she missed the quiet moments when she played just for herself. One night, she sat alone in the hall and played softly, eyes closed, thinking of her mother. She whispered, "I hope you're still listening." The room was empty, but she felt like someone was there, smiling. The next morning, she decided to visit the studio. It was a small building tucked between tall shops. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood and metal. The man greeted her warmly and showed her around. There were microphones, large speakers, and a grand piano in the center of the room. "This is where we make magic," he said with a smile. "Would you like to try?" She sat at the piano, nervous again. But as soon as her fingers touched the keys, the feeling vanished. She began to play a soft melody, one that she had made up herself. The sound filled the studio, rich and clear. When she finished, the man looked at her with admiration. "That was perfect," he said. "You play from the heart. People will feel that." He asked if he could record her playing. She agreed, not really understanding how it all worked. For the next few hours, she played while he recorded. When he played it back, she couldn't believe her ears. The sound was beautiful, like her music had been captured in the air. She smiled and whispered, "It sounds like a dream." The man promised to share her music with people he knew. He told her that talent like hers deserved to be heard by the world. She didn't think of fame or money. She only wanted to make people feel something through her music. When she left the studio that evening, the sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors. She walked slowly back to the school, feeling both tired and peaceful. She didn't know if her life would ever be easy, but she finally believed it could be beautiful. As she reached the door, she heard faint music coming from the hall. Some of the students were practicing, their laughter mixing with the sound of the piano. She stood there for a moment, smiling. For the first time, she didn't feel like a stranger anymore. She belonged there, and deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her story. The days passed quickly, and the girl began to feel a rhythm in her new life. The mornings were filled with practice, and afternoons were spent learning music theory, reading notes, and discovering pieces she had never heard before. She still remembered the streets and the nights she had spent alone, but now there was warmth and light in her life. The teachers were patient, helping her understand the music step by step. Some days were harder than others, when her fingers ached or when she struggled to learn a difficult piece, but she never gave up. One afternoon, the head of the school called her into his office. He had a folder in his hands filled with letters and invitations. "We've received an invitation from the city's main concert hall," he said. "They want you to perform at a charity event. This will be your biggest audience yet. Hundreds of people will be watching, and many of them will have never heard music like yours." Her stomach twisted. Hundreds of people? She had never played for more than a few judges and a small audience. But the thought of sharing her music, of telling her story through the piano, made her heart beat faster. "I will try," she said softly. The director smiled and nodded. "That's all we ask. Just be yourself." For the next several weeks, she practiced harder than ever. She learned new techniques, studied famous composers, and even began to write her own music. Each note she played carried a piece of her story. She remembered her mother's words about playing from the heart, and every time she felt nervous, she whispered to herself, "Play for her, play for yourself." Meanwhile, the school noticed a change in the other students too. Many of them who had once doubted her now looked up to her. They admired her dedication, the way she poured her feelings into every note, and the courage she showed every day. Some of them even began practicing longer, inspired by her example. The hallways of the school started to feel warmer, filled with laughter and music instead of whispers and doubt. One morning, while she was practicing in the large hall, a man came in quietly. He introduced himself as a local journalist who had heard about her first performance. He wanted to write a story about her life, how she had gone from living on the streets to performing on big stages. She hesitated at first. She had always been shy, never wanting attention, and the thought of strangers reading about her life made her uneasy. But the man spoke gently, telling her he wanted to inspire others by showing them how courage and determination could change a life. After thinking for a long time, she agreed. She told him about her mother, the nights she had spent playing alone, and how she had been discovered. The journalist listened carefully, taking notes and asking questions without rushing her. When she finished, she felt lighter, as if telling her story had lifted a weight from her chest. The day of the charity concert arrived. The hall was massive, with golden chandeliers hanging from the ceiling and rows of red velvet seats stretching far back. The air smelled of polished wood and flowers, and a soft murmur of conversation filled the space. She waited backstage, her hands trembling slightly as she adjusted her simple white dress. The lights on the stage were bright, almost blinding, but she remembered her practice sessions and the words of the head of the school, "Just be yourself." When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The audience was enormous, and for a moment fear gripped her heart. But then she closed her eyes and let her fingers touch the keys. The first notes were soft, gentle, like a whisper to the crowd. Slowly, the music grew, rising and falling with the story she was telling. Each chord carried her memories, her struggles, and her hope for the future. As she played, she saw faces in the audience change. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Some held hands with those next to them, and a few had tears glistening in their eyes. She didn't play for them. She played to tell her story, and the audience felt it. The notes seemed to stretch across the hall, reaching every person there. The applause from past performances seemed far away now. Here, she could see the effect her music had on people in real time, and it filled her with both joy and humility. When she finished, the silence lasted for a few moments before the hall erupted in clapping. People stood cheering, some calling out her name. She bowed, heart pounding, tears filling her eyes. Backstage, the director and teachers smiled, proud of her growth and courage. The journalist who had written about her was there too, smiling warmly and taking notes for the story he would publish soon. After the concert, a man approached her. He was an older musician, well known in the city, and he looked at her with respect. "You have something rare," he said. "A gift not just for skill, but for feeling. You remind me why music exists. If you keep playing like this, you could inspire many people." The girl listened quietly, humbled by his words. She didn't think of fame or success. She only wanted to continue playing, to express herself, and to honor the memory of her mother. That night, as she returned to her small attic, she thought about the streets she had once walked, the nights she had spent hungry and cold, and how far she had come. She realized that every struggle, every tear, had led her to this moment. The next few months were filled with lessons, practice, and small performances at the school. She became more confident, and her music continued to touch people's hearts. The teachers encouraged her to continue composing her own pieces. She began to write down melodies that came to her in quiet moments, inspired by the city streets, the stars, and the people she met. Sometimes she would visit the recording studio again. The man there helped her record her new compositions. Listening to the playback, she felt a sense of wonder. Her music was no longer just in her mind or fingers. It existed for others to hear. She realized that she could share her story not only through words but through melodies that spoke of struggle, hope, and resilience. One day, a new student joined the school. He was shy and nervous, unsure of himself, and reminded the girl of herself when she first arrived. She sat with him and encouraged him to try. showing him how to relax his hands and play softly. Watching him improve over the next few weeks reminded her of how far she had come, and it filled her with pride. Helping others became as important as playing herself. Through all of this, she never forgot her mother. Every evening she would play quietly in the hall, imagining her mother listening, smiling, and nodding. The memory of those nights when she first discovered music alone kept her grounded. She knew that even though her mother was gone, her love and guidance were still with her, living through every note she played. As her confidence grew, she began to think about what she wanted for her future. The city offered many opportunities for talented musicians, and she knew that she had the potential to reach far beyond the school. But she also knew that she wanted to stay true to herself, to the music that came from her heart rather than chasing applause or recognition. Each performance reminded her why she started, to share feelings that words could not capture, to make people feel something beautiful even if only for a few minutes. Eventually, she was invited to perform at another major event, this time with other musicians from across the country. The thought was exciting but also frightening. She had learned to play in quiet moments in small halls, and now she would be on a stage with lights, cameras, and hundreds of strangers. But she remembered the first night she sat at the piano, the cold streets and the dream of her mother. She knew she could face it. On the day of the event, she arrived early, exploring the backstage area and listening to the other performers. She felt small and nervous, but also alive. When it was finally her turn, she stepped onto the stage, took a deep breath, and sat at the grand piano. She closed her eyes and let her fingers speak. The first notes floated softly, then built into a melody full of hope, sadness, and courage. The audience was silent, listening, and feeling every emotion she poured into the music. By the time she finished, tears were visible on many faces. The applause was overwhelming, but she focused on the feeling of the music still vibrating in the air. She bowed, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. For the first time, she understood that her journey was more than just learning to play or performing. It was about touching people's hearts and connecting with them in ways nothing else could. Backstage, she was congratulated not only by the judges and teachers, but by other performers who had been inspired by her courage and talent. She felt a strange warmth, a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. The journey from the streets to this stage had been hard, full of obstacles and fears. But she realized that every moment had been necessary to reach this point. That night, walking home under the quiet city lights, she thought about what lay ahead. Her life was changing, and she knew there would be new challenges. But for the first time, she felt ready to face the world, ready to play, ready to continue her journey and share her music with everyone who would listen. She had started alone with only a piano in her dreams, and now she had a family of mentors, friends, and fellow musicians who believed in her. She looked up at the stars shining above and whispered softly, "I will keep playing, for you, for me, and for everyone who needs to hear it." And in that quiet moment, she felt the weight of her past lift, replaced by hope, determination, and a heart full of music. The city had begun to feel smaller to her, even though it was still as busy and noisy as ever. Every corner, every alley reminded her of the past she had left behind. The cold nights, the hunger, the loneliness. But now those memories no longer brought only sadness. They reminded her of how far she had come, of the resilience that had carried her from the streets to the grand halls where her music now lived. The music school had become her second home. She woke early every morning, the light of dawn spilling through the small attic window, and practiced until the sun was high in the sky. The teachers guided her gently, correcting her technique, encouraging her to try new pieces, and nurturing her growing confidence. She loved the piano more than ever, not just for the sound it produced, but for the way it gave her a voice when words were not enough. One morning, the school director called her into his office. He had a letter in his hand, the seal of the city's largest music academy visible on the envelope. "They want you to perform in their spring showcase," he said. "It is one of the biggest events in the region. People come from all over to hear the most promising young musicians. This is an incredible opportunity." Her stomach tightened. The thought of performing in front of so many strangers made her nervous. She had performed before, yes, but never on a stage so large with so many eyes fixed on her. I will try," she said quietly, her hands trembling slightly. The director smiled and patted her shoulder. "That is all anyone can ask," he said. "Just remember why you play and the rest will follow." She spent the following weeks in quiet preparation. Every day she played for hours, sometimes late into the night. Her fingers ached, but the music made her forget the pain. She experimented with new melodies, combining what she had learned with what she felt inside. Some days she felt brilliant, her music flowing like a river. Other days she felt stuck, the notes refusing to come together. But she never gave up. Each attempt, even the failed ones, taught her something new. One afternoon, she noticed a younger student sitting alone in the hallway, fiddling nervously with a violin. The boy's eyes darted around, afraid that someone might laugh at him. She walked over quietly and said, "Don't worry. Just try." The boy looked up, surprised that someone would speak to him kindly. "I can't," he whispered. She smiled gently. "Everyone starts somewhere. You just have to keep going." She stayed with him for a few minutes, showing him a simple exercise on the piano that he could play along with. The boy's face lit up with the first hint of a smile she had ever seen. Helping others became a small joy she had not expected. She realized that music was not just about her story. It was about connection, about giving others courage and hope. The student she had encouraged began practicing every day, and she would quietly watch him improve. It reminded her of her own journey and made her feel grateful for the teachers and friends who had believed in her when no one else did. Finally, the day of the spring showcase arrived. The Music Academy's hall was larger than any stage she had ever played on. The lights sparkled like stars, and the audience was already filling the seats, buzzing with anticipation. She felt nervous, but she took a deep breath and reminded herself of her mother's words, of the nights she had spent playing alone in quiet halls. When her name was called, she stepped onto the stage. The bright lights blinded her for a moment, but she focused on the piano in front of her. The first notes she played were soft, cautious, but gradually they grew, gaining strength and confidence. She played not for applause, not for recognition, but because she needed to tell her story. Each chord carried the nights she had spent alone, the fear she had felt, the hope that had kept her moving forward, and the love for the music that had never left her. The audience was silent. They listened as the melody rose and fell, as her hands danced across the keys with grace and power. Some people closed their eyes, letting the music speak directly to their hearts. Others sat forward, captivated by the emotion and honesty in her playing. She felt herself becoming one with the piano, the hall, and the music itself. For a moment it felt as though nothing else existed, only her story told through each note. When she reached the final chords, the hall remained quiet for a heartbeat before applause erupted like a wave. People stood cheering and clapping, some wiping tears from their eyes. She bowed, a mixture of relief, joy, and exhaustion washing over her. Backstage, the director and her teachers smiled proudly. They knew how much she had grown and how much heart she had poured into her performance. Later, she was approached by a man wearing a suit and carrying a folder. He introduced himself as a talent scout from a renowned music academy overseas. He had heard of her performances and wanted to offer her a scholarship to study abroad, where she could continue to grow as a musician. She felt a mixture of excitement and fear. Traveling to a new country, leaving the city she had come to call home, was a daunting thought. But she also knew that music had no borders, and that this opportunity could open doors she had never imagined. The next few days were filled with decisions. She met with her teachers, discussed her options, and thought about her past, her present, and her dreams for the future. Finally, she decided to accept the scholarship. It was not just about learning more, but about sharing her music with the world, about continuing the journey that had begun on the streets and led her to stages and hearts everywhere. Packing her few belongings was strange. She had lived simply for so long that the idea of leaving her small attic felt both sad and thrilling. She held her mother's old photograph close to her heart and whispered, "I will make you proud." Every step she took from the school to the airport felt surreal. The city streets, once so familiar, now seemed smaller, as though they were giving her permission to leave and explore the wider world. On the plane, she stared out the window at the clouds below. For the first time, she thought about her life not as a struggle, but as a journey full of possibilities. She remembered every cold night, every lonely hour, and realized they had shaped her into the musician she had become. She promised herself that no matter where she went, she would always stay true to the music inside her, the music that spoke of hope, courage, and resilience. Arriving in a new country was overwhelming. The city was bustling with unfamiliar sights, sounds, and languages, but she felt a quiet determination. She knew that music would be her guide, the bridge that connected her to new teachers, new students, and new audiences. She enrolled in the academy, met her instructors, and began practicing on instruments far grander than she had ever imagined. Each day she discovered new challenges, but also new joys. Every piece she learned, every technique she mastered, brought her closer to becoming the musician she aspired to be. In the evenings, she often sat by the window of her small dormitory room, playing softly to herself. She imagined the streets she had left behind, the nights she had spent alone, and the small moments of kindness that had led her to this point. She realized that her journey was never just about performing. It was about living fully, about finding beauty and hope even in the darkest times. Months turned into a year, and her music continued to grow. She performed in small recitals, then larger concerts, and eventually in halls filled with hundreds of people. Each performance reminded her why she had started, to tell a story through music, to touch hearts, and to inspire others. She never forgot the streets she had walked, the hunger and fear she had felt, and the promise she had made to her mother. One evening, after a particularly moving concert, she returned to her dorm room exhausted but happy. She sat at the small piano in her room, letting her fingers drift across the keys. The notes were quiet, personal, and full of emotion. As she played, she thought about the journey she had taken, from the streets to this hall, from fear to courage, from silence to music that could touch the world. She smiled softly, knowing that this was only the beginning. Her story had been written in melodies, in tears and smiles, in moments of quiet determination. She had learned that music was not just about notes, but about life itself, the struggles, the victories, the love, and the hope that kept her moving forward. And as she played that night, she whispered once more to her mother, "I am still playing, and I will never stop." The sound of the piano echoed softly through the room, a gentle reminder of how far she had come, and how far she was still destined to go. The girl had now been studying at the music academy for more than a year. Every day felt like a step into a new world, one that was full of challenges, discoveries, and moments of quiet wonder. She had grown taller, her fingers stronger, and her confidence deeper. But she never forgot the streets she had once called home, the nights when she had nothing but a piano and her dreams. Those memories were not sad anymore. They were reminders of the journey that had made her who she was. One morning she received a letter from the city where she had first been discovered. The letter was an invitation to perform at a special charity event aimed at helping children who were living in circumstances similar to hers. Her heart leapt. This was more than just a performance. It was a chance to give back, to inspire others the way she had once needed inspiration herself. She immediately accepted, eager to play for those who might see hope in her music. The weeks leading up to the event were filled with preparation. She practiced tirelessly, refining her pieces, experimenting with new melodies, and even composing a few original tunes. She wanted every note to carry not just skill but feeling. Her teachers watched her grow, impressed by how her playing had evolved. They noted the emotion in her music, the way she could make an audience feel each note as though it were a personal story being told to them. The day of the charity concert arrived, and she found herself backstage, heart racing, palms sweaty, and stomach tight with nerves. The hall was enormous, filled with rows of seats, shining chandeliers, and an air thick with anticipation. Volunteers moved about, helping children find their places and guiding families to their seats. She could hear whispers of excitement, the shuffling of programs, and the soft murmurs of children. When her name was called, she walked onto the stage. The bright lights made her squint, and for a moment she felt that old familiar fear, the fear of not being enough, of failing those who were counting on her. But she remembered her mother's voice, her mother's gentle encouragement, and the nights she had spent playing in empty halls. She reminded herself that she was not playing for approval or applause, but to share something real and pure. She sat at the grand piano, letting her fingers rest lightly on the keys. The first notes she played were delicate, soft, and almost shy, but gradually they grew stronger, forming a melody that told the story of her life. The struggles, the moments of loneliness, the discovery of music, and the hope that had carried her forward. The audience listened in silence, captivated by the honesty and depth of her music. Children tilted their heads, some closing their eyes to feel the sound fully. Parents whispered softly, moved by the beauty of her playing. As she played, she felt a connection with the audience unlike anything before. Each note seemed to reach out, touching hearts, lifting spirits, and reminding everyone present that beauty could exist even in the hardest circumstances. She lost herself in the music, forgetting the stage, the lights, and the hundreds of eyes upon her. In that moment, it was just her and the piano, speaking a language beyond words. When she finished, the hall remained silent for a few long seconds. Then, as if a wave had broken, applause erupted. It was not just polite clapping, but an outpouring of genuine emotion. People rose to their feet, some with tears streaming down their faces, some cheering loudly and others simply smiling, moved in a way that only music could inspire. She bowed deeply, a small smile on her lips, her heart swelling with a mixture of relief, pride, and gratitude. Backstage, the organizers congratulated her, praising her for the courage and emotion she had shared. Several parents approached her, telling her how much the performance had meant to their children. One little boy, holding his mother's hand, looked up at her with wide eyes and whispered, "I want to play like that one day." She knelt down and smiled at him. "You can," she said softly. "If you believe and keep trying, you can play anything you dream of." Later, she met the director of the music academy and several of her teachers. They told her how proud they were of her journey and how far she had come. The girl listened quietly, feeling a sense of belonging and recognition she had never known before. Her life had changed in ways she had once thought impossible, and yet she knew this was only the beginning. Over the following months, she began to receive more invitations to perform. Some were in her city, others in neighboring towns, and a few even in distant cities. Each performance was a new opportunity to share her story, to inspire people with her music, and to remind herself of the journey that had brought her here. She never sought fame or fortune. She wanted only to play, to touch hearts, and to honor the memory of her mother. While traveling for these performances, she met many young musicians, each with their own stories of struggle and triumph. She listened to them, encouraged them, and sometimes offered advice from her own experience. Slowly, she realized that her journey was not just about her own success, but about helping others find courage and hope through music. She discovered a deep sense of purpose in mentoring and guiding those who were just beginning their journeys. Even with the busy schedule of performances and lessons, she always found time to practice alone. Some nights she would sit at the piano in her small dormitory room, the city lights twinkling outside, and play for hours. These moments were private, sacred, a time to reconnect with the emotions that had first drawn her to music. She thought of her mother, the streets she had walked, and the nights she had dreamed of a life filled with music. Each note she played was a conversation with her past, a way to honor the journey she had undertaken. One evening, after a particularly moving recital, she returned to her dorm exhausted but content. She opened her journal, writing down new melodies and reflections on the day. She realized how far she had come, from a girl with nothing but a piano on the street to someone who could touch hundreds of lives with her music. Her hands hovered over the keys as she wrote, and then she began to play a quiet piece she had composed herself. The melody was gentle, filled with longing and hope, and as the notes floated through the room, she felt a profound peace. The years continued to pass, and her reputation as a gifted, heartfelt musician grew. She performed in grand concert halls, small community events, and charity gatherings. No matter the venue, she played with the same honesty and emotion, remembering that her music was meant to connect, heal, and inspire. Every performance reminded her of the girl who had once sat on the street, fingers trembling, dreaming of a life she could hardly imagine. Despite her growing success, she remained humble and grounded. She never forgot the kindness of the judge who had first discovered her, the teachers who had believed in her, or the small moments of support that had made the difference in her life. She often returned to the music school where it all began, sharing her experiences with the students and encouraging them to follow their own dreams. no matter how impossible they seemed. One day, she was invited to perform at an international music festival. She felt both nervous and exhilarated. This was a stage far larger than any she had ever played on, with audiences from all over the world. She prepared tirelessly, practicing day and night, perfecting every piece while still leaving room for the emotion that made her music unique. When the day arrived, she walked onto the stage, feeling the weight of anticipation but also the joy of sharing her gift. As her fingers touched the keys, the music flowed effortlessly. The audience was captivated, not by the skill alone, but by the soul in every note. She played as she had always played, with honesty, courage, and passion. The performance ended to a standing ovation, and for a long moment, she simply stood there, absorbing the warmth and admiration of the crowd. But more than applause, it was the connection she felt with the audience that mattered. She had learned that music was not about recognition or awards. It was about touching hearts, about reminding people of hope, love, and resilience. That night, she sat alone in her hotel room, looking out over the city lights. She thought about everything she had been through, the nights on the streets, the discovery by the kind judge, the years of learning, the performances, and the people she had met along the way. Every moment had shaped her. Every struggle had strengthened her, and every note she played carried the story of her life. She whispered softly, "I made it this far, and I will keep going." Her fingers traced the keys of the small keyboard in the room, and she played a simple melody, one she had composed for herself long ago. The notes were soft, like a lullaby, but filled with the strength and courage that had carried her through every challenge. From that day forward, she continued to play, to compose, and to inspire. She taught others when she could, visited children in need, and always remembered the girl she once was, alone, cold, and dreaming of a piano that could change her life. She knew that her journey was not just about music. It was about resilience, hope, and the power of dreams. Her life became a testament to what courage, determination, and love could achieve. She traveled the world, played for audiences who had never known her story, and shared music that touched souls. And yet, no matter how far she went or how many people she inspired, she remained the same girl at heart, grateful, humble, and connected to the music that had saved her. In quiet moments when she sat at a piano alone, she would think of her,